foundation for marriage. And who would have ever thought in the culture that we live in these days how appropriate this would be to have a simple plan of God's plan of what constitutes a marriage. And when you have so many people highly educated and supposedly very much in the know about everything, can't really clearly define it. It's this, it's that, and that's okay too, and that's all right. And there's a few more out there that probably would like to add some more to the mix of weird situations as far as family is concerned. But we're looking at the biblical side of it, and the only side that I can see that is worth looking at, because after all, God is the creator of all things, and that's the family as well. And he didn't have 25 choices for families. He had one. It was to be a male married to a female, and that they would produce children, the family. And that's pretty easy and pretty simple to figure out. And yet, we've gone over the top on so many other areas and directions we want to take this thing in. What we're looking at now is another pillar. Another pillar is that the marriage union is permanent. Now, that's a hot issue too today, is it not? When I was a child growing up, well, marriage was permanent. Divorce almost never happened. In fact, in West Virginia, where I was born and raised in those days, you could not get a divorce unless you could prove that your spouse was unfaithful in a court of law. Needless to say, there were not too many divorces. But today, you don't even need a reason other than I want a divorce. And if you want a divorce, you can get one. But from God's perspective, it's permanent. He didn't create marriage to be something that after a few days, a few weeks, a few months, or a few years, or several decades, it would just toss in the towel and say, this isn't working, forget it. That's not God's plan at all. God's plan is it's perfect and permanent. It's His plan. In the New Testament, marriage is conceived as binding together one man and one woman for life. Marriage is a life sentence. It really is. It's a life sentence. And I remember as I was standing at the front of the church, the pastor was there before us, and I had myself and the best man there, and we were eagerly anticipating Kathy coming through and walking down the aisle. And sure enough, she did. And it is at that exact moment as she was walking down the aisle, I thought, this is it. There is no turning back. There's no backing out. There's no separation. There is no divorce. And I knew that. I realized that. And I accepted that. And Kathy and I both have that position. Divorce is not an option. It's not an option. And when you read what God says, I hate the putting away, that is divorcing. I hate that. To me, that says if God hates it, I better take it good and serious in that matter. And so it is, from God's eyes, for life. Only death terminates the marriage relationship. Jesus mentions only one biblical ground for divorce: fornication. Now, you're going to need to understand the Hebrew concept of marriage and the events that leads up to that marriage to understand the situation correctly, that what Jesus said. Fornication is a general word that refers to all types, varieties, and kinds of sexual sin. If it is a sexual sin in any way, shape, form, or fashion, it falls under the general heading of fornication. In the Hebrew culture, their preparation for marriage and actual marriage is similar to ours, but yet significantly different in some ways. Two families would arrange a marriage of their children. And they would arrange the marriage in consultation with their children that are getting married, the two that are being proposed, the bride and the groom that are being proposed. All the factors would be talked about and discussed between the heads of families, the patriarch of each of the families. And they would discuss these things with input from the bride, input from the groom, as well as other family members. And when they arrived at the point that they said that this would be a good marriage, they would actually draw up a legal contract for the two of them, the bride and the groom, to get married. At a future point, the marriage ceremony would take place, the consummation of the marriage would take place, and then the celebration would follow that. But the legal aspect was simply began as the marriage by signing the paper, as we would call it, the contract. They all agreed to it. They all put their name to it. They all put their honor to it. During that period of time, and on average in the Hebrew family and the culture, it was about a year. The title of that, when you signed the contract, you were now betrothed to be married. And that betrothal was a legally binding document. And you usually would have about a year, generally, sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more, in which both families would look for something unclean in either the groom or the bride. And if anything unclean, and by unclean the definition was fornication. It had sexual overtones. Sexual sin of some sort in either one or both. If these things could be found out and brought up and discussed, it is the only grounds to legally break the marriage contract. Now, all of this must be accomplished within that year or ever how many months, shy of a year or more than a year. It has to happen in between that contract time for the marriage. And if something was found, if they wanted to, they could get a divorce on the basis of something unclean, some sort of sexual sin. They could get a divorce, meaning the contract is broken. Now you need to realize that the marriage is not consummated until the actual ceremony is performed. And then that is followed by the sexual consummation of the marriage. It was generally believed in the early days of Israel's history that once the consummation took place sexually, there was no divorce. It had to fall within the breaking of the contract. This, Jesus put his blessing upon that, which dated, well, centuries before Jesus actually came and was born and was the incarnate Christ among us, that they had lived that way. But by Jesus' day, there were two main thoughts on divorce. There was the conservative thought that took the position that I basically just described to you. That was the conservative thought. Then there was the liberal thought. You can get a divorce anytime you want to get one for any reason that you want to get one. The common example was if the wife burned the beans and the husband got upset because the wife burned the beans, he could divorce her. And the divorce was simple. He simply would say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. 3 times. A done deal. That was the liberal side. Jesus obviously didn't take the liberal side. He held to the higher standard, which honored his Father and himself in regards to this matter, that marriage is a permanent relationship. And one needs to enter into that relationship with full understanding of that. And then striving to make that marriage work. So, anyway, the only grounds that Jesus permitted was fornication, just as we had described. Now, Paul mentions abandonment as grounds also in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Well, there's the Corinthian church. The Corinthian church was, well, it was not exactly the most spiritual church around. And if you were to look at the classifications, the most unspiritual church mentioned in the Bible was the church at Laodicea. The second under the Laodicean church was the Corinthian church. A situation rose up in the Corinthian church that was brought to Paul's attention. And so he gave this under the inspiration of the Spirit of God. Abandonment. What happened was, in the situation in the Corinthian church, 2 people were married. Both of them were non-Christians. Then one of them became a Christian and didn't like the fact that the other one didn't recognize the fact the other one was not a Christian. They wanted to stay in the marriage, the Christian did. They didn't want to terminate the marriage. They wanted to stay married, even though they had come to faith in Christ and the other one hadn't. Well, the one that hadn't come to faith in Christ abandoned the wife. Left her. And she was the one who had become a Christian. He would have nothing to do with her because she had become a Christian. Off he went. No official divorce. He abandoned her. He quit being with her. He quit living with her. He quit supporting her. He quit taking care of her. He left. Gone. She was on her own. So the question comes up, what is she to do? Who's going to take care of her in that particular culture? Women were supposed to be basically homemakers. You took care of the children, and you made a home for them, and you did things of that nature. The opportunity to go out and get a job somewhere just didn't exist. And what is going to happen? The most easy answer to that matter was to remarry. So what about the whole idea of abandonment, though? There's no divorce. Even if there was, she would be classified, if she remarried, an adulteress under the Hebrew law. So instead of calling it a divorce or a separation, it was abandonment, which basically put it in this context. For all intent and practical purposes, the husband had died. Though he hadn't actually died, but he quit doing anything for her, as a husband should. And so therefore, entitling it abandonment, he died. She was now not under obligation or bondage to be married to the man anymore who abandoned her. He forsook her. And so she was able to remarry and not be classified an adulteress, and everything would be just fine. That's the way that situation worked. And that's how Paul, under the inspiration of the Spirit of God, handled that. Then we have here in Romans chapter 7, verses 1 through 3. Paul writes under the inspiration of the Spirit of God, "Know you not, brethren." You'll read phrases like that oftentimes in the New Testament, particularly when Paul writes. And others would occasionally say something very similar to that. But the statement itself it points out this. It's negatively saying what positively happened. They know what the subject matter is about that is going to be instructed. So when he says, "Know you not?" Yes, you do, brethren. You do know. And here he points it out. "For I speak to them that know the law." And so he's talking to the religious leaders. They know the law. They know the Mosaic law. They know what is stated in it. "How that the law hath dominion over a man." Dominion here means authority over a man as long as he liveth. And this is in regards to marriage. "For the woman which hath an husband is bound," wedded, locked in by the law to her husband, so long as he liveth. And again, this points out the whole fact of what Paul was talking about in the earlier situation that we pointed out about two people that got married. They were not Christians when they got married. One of them became a Christian. The other one abandoned the person. And they viewed that as a death sentence, is what they basically viewed that as. Is bound, the woman which hath an husband is bound by the law to her husband, so long as he liveth. But if or since the husband be dead, she is loosed from the law of her husband. Thus the term abandonment. It's like he died, since he just up, left, gone, just like that, just like a person suddenly dies. They're gone. They can't do anything further. Loosed from the husband. So if, while her husband liveth, she be married to another man, she shall be called an adulteress. But if her husband be dead, like in the case of abandonment, she is free from that law, so that she is no adulteress, though she be married to another man. And so that's Paul explaining that situation to the Roman Christians, which apparently they had some who went through that similar situation as well. So you can see things can get rather tricky here on this. But let's get back to the principle of marriage. The first thing we need to remember about the principle of marriage is it's serious. It's not something you decide at the drop of a hat, let's get married. It needs to be something that is thought out. You need to each, the husband or the bride and the groom, need to know each other and know what everybody thinks. They ought to be talking together about the important things of life and make sure that they are in agreement and in accord with those things. Fidelity. the word itself means absolute faithfulness, that is, devotion, is the fundamental basis of every true marriage. Both marriage partners should give the other no basis for mistrust. Don't say anything, don't do anything that will suggest that you're being unfaithful in any way, shape, or form. Believers are told not to be unfaithful with one's heart by committing heart infidelity or entertaining lustful thoughts. Lust is the root word there, and lust is, well, it is to do something, to think something, to dwell upon something that is illegal. In other words, God has laid down a law, an ordinance, a command, a stipulation that certain things should be done and certain things should not be done. And if you're not going to do the things you should be doing and doing the things that you should not be doing, it enters into this matter of lust. It is in the thought, in the brain. I want to do this. And lust, the word itself literally means that it is against the law or against the command of God. He has forbidden it. And we want to do it anyway, and we're going to think about it in our minds. More about that as we go on. You have heard here in Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 through 28, this is Jesus speaking. You have heard that it was said by them of old time, talking about in the very beginning when the nation was formed. Thou shalt not commit adultery, but I say unto you. Now Jesus is going to add to this. He's going to add a greater stipulation to committing adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh upon a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. In other words, men primarily are motivated sexually by sight. So they look at a woman and say, boy, I would sure like to have sex with her. But never actually commit the act. But in God's eyes, he has already committed adultery by the fact that he wants to have sex with a woman that he is not married to. And in most cases, since almost everybody gets married, with very few exceptions, he's looking at a woman that is married to another individual. King David looked from the balcony of his palace to the wife of Uriah, and her name was Bathsheba. He looked at her while she took a bath, obviously in sight of David, at her house. I have noticed something rather interesting. I watch a lot of home building programs, building houses. I watch a lot about restoration of houses, restoring them, updating them, and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things I've noticed that is very, very interesting to me, though nobody says anything about it, they're remodeling the bathroom. Where do they put the bathtub? In front of a window to the outside. And it's not just a little window. In some cases, it's 6 feet or more wide. And in some cases, it reaches the ceiling. And there's no mention about drapes, blinds, curtains, or anything of any kind of screening. And everybody just applauds those things on the program as being, oh, that's beautiful, that's wonderful, that's nice. But you do see the problem. And you do wonder why those situations come about. But anyway, David saw Bathsheba some distance away bathing. And he sends for her. And the rest we know. He committed adultery with her. Wow. Well, let's go to the next word. Love is the ultimate grounds of marriage. We're not talking about casual love. We're not talking about things that we call love. We're talking about actual love. Frequently, you find that the Bible will use the very word that is the word of the highest form of love that is mentioned in the Bible is the love of God. And it comes in two forms. It comes in the noun form and it comes in an adverb form. It is agapao or agape, either one. It is the highest form of love. It is the purest form of love. It is the love that God has for humanity. It is the love that God has for his children. It is the love that we should have for God. It is also the love that a man is to have for his wife. Yeah, now that's powerful when you think about that. Love, the ultimate grounds of marriage. Now, a woman also has responsibility in reciprocating love, but the love with her is wrapped up in a different package. It's called reverence, respect for her husband. She reveres him. She honors him. She upholds him. She respects him. Reverence. That is her expression of love to him. And that is something that we need to keep in mind on that. Well, moving on. This love is to be mutual, self-giving love, not just physical attraction. That's infatuation. Many marriages are made on infatuation, not on love. They call it love, but it is really not love at all. It's physical attraction that they have for each other. And they call that love. Can't base it on that. Not just friendship, though these certainly play a part. Attraction and friendship are important items in the marriage. We need to be attracted to our spouse. We need to have friendship with our spouse. But those are not the central point of what holds the marriage together. They're bonus points for marriage. All right? The type of love to be found in marriage is the same kind of love that Christ had for the church, agape, or self-giving, sacrificial love. The kind of love given believers by Christ, even to the laying down of his life. Ephesians 5, 21 through 31. Marriage partners are to be united in heart, purpose, and in love. Husbands have the responsibility to love their wives as Christ loved the church. Wives have the responsibility to reverence, that is, honor, submit, respect, and obey their husbands. Obviously, some of those things go against the culture of society today. but nevertheless, they're principles that God teaches in regards to this whole matter of marriage. Well, our time has come and our time is gone.